Hello everyone, how's it going? And welcome to today's Wild Rift video. In this video, we're going to be talking about all of the new items and all of the changes that happen to items in patch 5.2. We have three really huge items, three really big items that came into Wild Rift this patch, which I'll talk about my stance on them a little bit later on, and also a new boots enchant as well. So I'll be able to talk about that and let you know my feelings on the boots enchant. But not only that, this gives me an opportunity to also talk about the other items, what changes have happened to items since patch 5.1, as I like to do these videos at the start of every single major patch. But also we had the removal of the light and the dark items, so that means that most of these items got converted back to how they were before, which means that their power has either gone up or gone back down. So it's going to be pretty exciting to go through all of this with you. As always, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below. Let me know what you think of the item meta at the moment and what changes you'd like to see to items in the future updates for Wild Rift. So first, we're going to be taking a look at physical items. We might as well start with the elephant in the room, Sundered Sky. Now, before the hotfix buff that happened, I had Sundered Sky in the A tier, but I honestly feel like with the little bit of a hotfix buff that came in with Sundered Sky, now only being 2,900 gold, I think this is a great first item for most bruisers, especially in the jungle as well. You can also play this in the barrel lane if you want to as a rush first item, but this mainly works really well in the jungle because of its passive being the first attack against the enemy critically strikes, and this also works with multiple enemy champions, so you can proc this multiple times. This works best in the jungle because you're always going for the skirmishes, you're always going for ganks, whether you're ganking the duo lane as well. That first auto attack is going to do a lot of bonus damage, but also give you a bit of extra healing as well. So overall, I think Sundered Sky is a great item. It's a great flexible item as well, and it just works on so many bruisers that love to auto attacks. And to be honest, I've been seeing some Chinese builds even build this on assassins as well, which I don't really feel like is the best option, but I could see the, why they could be, it could be so strong, because you can combo this with items like Dustblade, which also gives you that empowered auto attack towards enemy champions. Mortal Reminder, I mean, it's a no-brainer that this should be up there. It's the best in terms of the percent armor pen item. It's a lot better than Serrader's Grudge. There's only 2% armor pen items in the game, Serrader's Grudge and Mortal Reminder. Mortal Reminder is also really good because of the Grievous Wounds passive as well. There is so much healing in the game still, so many bruises being played, even if you're against someone like an Olaf or an Aatrox, understanding the champions and whether they have a lot of healing is such a big deal in Wild Rift. If you're against a laner that has a lot of healing, Fiora is another good example as well, or even any Baron laner that has Grasp of the Undying, a lot of players still go for Mortal Reminder over the likes of Kempunk Chainsword. So Mortal Reminder, I mean, it's built on pretty much every single ADC as well. Again, the best armor pen item there. So no brainer there as to why it is in S tier. Trinity Force, in my opinion, a lot better than Divine Sundra. The only reason I would pick Divine Sundra over Trinity Force is if I'm playing in the Baron lane and if I'm versus a tank. But if I'm not, then I always go for Trinity Force. Trinity Force is also a very powerful, very big power spike in the jungle. You can go for this as a first item. The only kind of downside, I guess you can say, quote me on that, is that it costs a lot of money. The difference between Trinity Force and Sundered Sky is 400 gold. And sometimes you want to go for Sundered Sky over Trinity Force, but then you lack that little bit of attack speed that you get with Trinity Force. And some people, and a lot of players at the moment, are building both Sundered Sky and Trinity Force in pretty much every single bruiser build at the moment in the jungle. So definitely give this a try, whether you're playing someone like Xin Zhao, whether you're playing Viego, for example. There are so many bruisers that you can play in the jungle. I can go for the Sundered Sky plus Trinity Force combo, but you could also go Sundered Sky plus Divine Sunderer as well, because you have the healing from Sundered Sky and you also have the healing from Divine Sunderer as well. So there is a little bit of flexibility. The big thing about items is that every single item is pretty much situational. There are only a few items that you want to build in pretty much every single game, depending on the champion that you're playing, whether you're playing assassin or a tank, for example. But all of these items are situational. So even though I have items in certain tiers, they're all still going to be situational. And even my builds on my website, they're always situational as well. That's why I have a situational build part section, so you can see what other items you can build instead of maybe going for the main build in general. Youmuu's Ghostblade, still really good. Also really good going back to the normal version of Ghostblade. For those who don't know, there was a light version of Ghostblade which cost 3,200 gold, so it's a lot more expensive. It gave you a bit of extra armor penetration, and also the second part of the passive also gave you more armor pen when you proc the passive for the extra movement speed. But now it's gone back to the normal version. It's gone back to being a really, really strong first item. You can build this for 3,000 gold, really, really cheap. Gives you a lot of attack damage. The big thing, it gives you that plus armor penetration, which gives you a lot of early game power spike. This plus armor penetration doesn't scale as well into the mid and the late game, because the big difference is the percent armor penetration does a lot more against champions that are building a lot of armor. The plus armor penetration does better in the early game because most players' armor is very low early on. So you get that minus reduction in terms of armor on the enemy team. Whereas if you have like 300 armor on the enemy team, you know, it's a lot better to reduce the armor by 30% rather than reducing it by only 15. You know, you can see the big difference there. But yeah, Youmuu's Ghostblade, really strong, especially on assassins as well. You still build this as a first item, and even on some bruisers as well, you can still build this as a first item over Sundered Sky. But with Sundered Sky being cheaper, I feel like that could be the better option. A Bloodthirster, one of the best crit items in the game. Even though it is a very expensive item, you build this on most crit ADCs, to be honest with you, whether it's a first item for champions like Zeri or Severe, or whether you build this as a fourth or fifth item. Someone like Jhin or even Caitlyn can build this a little bit later on down the line. It's just an item that gives you a lot of great stats. You know, the 50 attack damage is already huge with the 25% crit chance. Physical vamp is such a big thing in this game. Just sustain in general is really, really huge, which is also another reason why most people also buy Mortal Reminder, because Bloodthirster is also very strong. But it's also because of the Blood Swan passive as well. When you're above that 50% HP, which is going to be most of the game as an AD carry, if you're below 50% health, you're probably going to be dead. So you gain the extra attack damage, which is between 11 and 25, and also you gain attack speed. So you can get up to 75 attack damage with this item, 10% attack speed, the 12% physical vamp, and the crit on top of that as well. So you can see how the stats can add up and be extremely powerful with this item. Onto the A tier now. Still incredibly good items. Black Cleaver on Bruisers especially, a really, really strong item that you can reduce the enemy's armor, and this can also stack as well, so you can actually reduce the enemy's armor by 25%. This works really well on champions that you can reduce the armor very quickly. Champions like Renekton, for example, that has 3 auto attacks with the empowered version of his third ability. That will count towards 3 stacks of Black Cleaver. But overall, really good on Bruisers. Great stats and great item overall. Edge of Night, probably one of the best defensive items, and is pretty much a go-to on every single AD assassin. You always want to go for this item in every single game. Yes, it doesn't give you the best stats in terms of damage, but that annul passive giving you that spell shield is so important in Wild Rift. There is so much crowd control in the game, and especially as an assassin, just a few examples: Shadow Assassin Kayn, Kha'Zix, trying to think of another one, Talon, for example. You know, all these champions build Edge of Night sometimes earlier than later because there's so much crowd control in the game, and sometimes that annul passive can save your life. Another really strong armor pen item is Duskblade, another item that works on pretty much most assassins, but also works incredibly well on some AD carries. Kai'Sa, Duskblade, first item, really, really powerful because it's quite cheap and it gives you that extra Night Stalker passive where your auto attack does more damage. Lucian as well, very, very big power spike for him, where he can get a really big power spike with his auto attacks, especially because he's double auto attacks as well. Again, Duskblade giving you that extra burst damage at the start of a fight. And yeah, just in general, really good item for assassins in general. Divine Sunderer, I spoke about a little bit. As I mentioned, I feel like this item is, in my opinion, this item is situational, and the same with Trinity Force. Both these items are situational. The reason why Trinity Force is higher is that you can build it on junglers as well as Baron laners. Divine Sunderer most of the time only gets played in the Baron lane. Again, the big difference between Divine Sunderer and Trinity Force is that Divine Sunderer does a lot better against tanks because it does that percent of the target's maximum health. So if you're against a tank, say an Ornn, Dr. Mundo, Scion, you want to go Divine Sunder as a bruiser in the Baron lane instead of Trinity Force. And this works the same scenario if there's tanks in the jungle or even in the support role. More of Mortius, honestly, if you have one source of magic damage on the other team, unless it's a support, for example, but say, for example, there's a mid laner, a jungler, a top laner, or a mid laner that has magic damage, most of the time you're building more of Mortius. This item is so incredibly powerful at the moment. Imagine the old Bloodthirster shield, but with more of Mortius being magic damage. Such an incredible item. You know, you can see there 20% of the damage dealt from basic attacks and also physical damage in general is converted into a magic shield, which can absorb magic damage. So every single time that you're auto attacking, that you're dealing physical damage, you're gaining a magic shield. So it's such an incredible item, and it's very, very powerful when you're playing against magic damage. Now, as I scroll down this list, you know, B tier is just kind of the standard tier, to be fair. You know, items that are not incredibly strong, but also not incredibly weak at the same time. I can quickly go through these items, but there's not really much to talk about in terms of these items. Instead of Eclipse, which I'll talk about, actually, I might as well talk about this item now. There was a hotfix that allowed this item to go from 55 to 60 AD. The only downside that I see about this item at the moment is it doesn't have the armor penetration that it used to have on PC League. I feel like quite a while ago now, but the reason why this item was so strong on PC League is because of the armor penetration. Some people still build this item on PC League, and to be honest, this is a pretty decent item on Wild Rift. You do get quite a bit of attack damage. The passive as well scales pretty decently into the mid and the late game because it does bonus physical damage equal to the target's maximum health, so a percentage of the target's maximum health. So that means that the item scales well in terms of damage in the late game, and also gives you that bit of shielding as well, so it gives you the bit of defensive stats. Like I said, the only thing is you're comparing this item to an item like Ghostblade, for example, which gives you that plus 15 armor penetration, which might not seem like a lot, but it does a lot, honestly, because your armor penetration, your plus armor penetration means that you're going to be ignoring armor on the enemy team. And with this item, for example, even though it has more attack damage, you're not going to be reducing the armor. So attack damage might be more, but then you're not getting as much. And to be honest, it's not that much difference. Only 5 attack damage difference. So again, Ghostblade, you have the movement speed passive as well, whereas Eclipse is a more defensive, I guess, item as well because of the shield passive, but also can give you a bit of burst damage as well with the passive. Again, I think this item still works incredibly well on some champions. Riven and Jace are the two main champions that want to go for this item, just because they can proc the Eclipse passive so easily. You know, Jace, you can jump in, you can use your second ability, easy. Riven, you have so many abilities that you can combo, easily proc the passive. That's the only champions that you kind of want to use this towards, is that hitting enemy champion with 2 separate attacks or abilities within that time period. They're the best champions that you want to use this item on. Now to go through, let me repeat that. Now to go through the other items on the B tier. Runa's Hurricane, this item's a bit weird now because it doesn't give you the crit anymore. It gives you that wins favor passive, so you basically get attack damage or ability power plus the 35% attack speed, and also you get the extra on-hit damage as well. Works okay on some AD carries. You know, there are some AD carries like Jinx, for example, which this can work really well with, and that's just because you kind of want to spread the auto attacks and try and get a takedown to try and proc your passive. It can work well with Callista as well with her Rend passive. There are some champions that this can work on, but to be honest, there are a lot better attack speed items on just AD carries in general. And outside of AD carries, the item doesn't really get built. Magnetic Blaster is pretty good. I might as well put Magnetic Blaster and Stormrazor in the same conversation. Magnetic Blaster is really good. It has the Energized passive. You know, you get that extra movement speed. You can also generate your Energized passive 25% faster. Decent amount of attack speed, decent amount of crit. The extra attack range is also really, really huge as well, especially with a lot of bruisers in the game at the moment. That extra attack range that you get with Magnetic Blaster is, in my opinion, really, really huge. And this thing combos with Stormrazor. Most of the time when you build Magnetic Blaster, you're also going to be building Stormrazor at the same time. There are some situations where you don't want to, but the big thing is that the energized passive stack. So the magic damage from Stormrazor and the magic damage from Magnetic Blaster both add on top of each other. So Storm Razor, again, you're getting the slow from the Storm Razor from the passive as well. And that slow will happen at the same time as the extra range that you're getting. So you're getting this long range slow, which is going to be super annoying for the enemies to deal with. And because it generates 25% faster, you're actually going to be getting this up a lot more often than what you think. Wits End, pretty decent attack speed item. I would much prefer to go more of Malmortius as a magic resist item though over Wits End, just because in general that magic shield is going to do a lot more for you. However, there are some champions that want to go attack speed instead and that work a lot better with attack speed. Champions like Vayne and Irelia, for example. You know, Vayne, you just want as much attack speed as possible. The same with Irelia. That's why more of Malmortius is not really on their builds. It's just Wits End. So yeah, that's the reasoning behind that one. I'll talk about the support items, I think, afterwards, like at the end of the video. I'm not going to talk about them now. The Vori Quick Blades, again, works on some champions. It's a pretty decent item, you know, works on like Grays, Tristana, doesn't really work well as a first item, which I think is a bit of a problem, because you want to get that extra crit damage in your build before you build this item because of the passive. You know, when you critically strike, you're reducing your non-ultimate abilities. 25%, not that much, so it's a little bit difficult at 25% as a first item, but whether you want to build this as a second or a third item, it could be pretty decent. Serpent's Fang, a bit of a situational item. I would say more of a situational item than Mortal Reminder. Mortal Reminder pretty much gets built every single game because there's always going to be at least one source of healing, whether it's from an item or a champion, for example. Whereas shielding is a lot more situational. It completely depends on who you're up against, who you're playing against, whether they have shielding or not. In terms of the item itself, it's pretty powerful. Again, it's kind of similar to Ghostblade in a way, where you get the plus armor penetration, the attack damage, and also the ability haste. Infinity Edge, not that good of an item anymore, unfortunately. Going from the ruined version that it had before, where it had 225% crit, it was probably one of the best crit items in the game, to now becoming, honestly, one of the worst crit items in the game. The meta is basically going back to what it was before these Ruin and Light items, where no one builds Infinity Edge. There are maybe like 1 or 2 champions that build Infinity Edge, and that's because their abilities also work well with crit. Someone like Samira, for example. But in general, Infinity Edge, not a great item. You're spending so much gold as well. You know, the gold's gone back up to 3,400. The crit's gone down to 205%. You just, in general, don't want to build this as a crit item at the moment in the current meta. Immortal Shieldbow, I actually really like this item. I think the only downside is kind of the scaling of this item. I feel like if the scaling of this item was a bit better, then this would probably get built a lot more. But overall, you have a lot of great stats, you know, attack damage, attack speed, and also crit rate. The lifeline passive, meaning that you can get that shield when you are low on health. So it's a very good defensive item for AD carries. Like I said, the only downside for me is that kind of crit scaling. You know, you get an extra point of shielding depending on your crit chance, which most of the time when you're building Shieldbow, you are building other crit items. But again, it's kind of the same situation as an Avori, right? Where you don't really want to build this as a first item because you're not getting the full power because you don't have that much critical strike chance. Same as Navori Quick Blades as well. So even though Mortal Shieldbows is kind of supposed to be a first item, it's not really built as a first item because you want to build it later on to get the most amount of value from the shield, if that makes sense. That's why it's not really built. Solari Charge Blade, mainly good for champions that are going to be using abilities a lot. Overall, it's pretty decent. It's okay on Lucian. It's okay on other champions as well. If you want to go crit Riven, you can also go Solari Charge Blade on her as well. It's a decent crit item. It's not the best, but it's just really good on some champions. Serrated Grudge, as I mentioned, not as good as Mortal Reminder. Serrated Grudge is only really built on champions that could really benefit a lot from the slow. One champion that comes to mind straight away is Ezreal. But to be honest, even Ezreal nowadays likes to go for Mortal Reminder, even though the crit doesn't really do anything for Ezreal. Just the anti-heal in general is just way too powerful. You know, the anti-heal mechanic, the passive is just way too good. But it doesn't mean Serrated Grudge is a bad item though. As I mentioned, you know, there's situations, there are champions that benefits a lot more from the slow, and maybe there's some games that you don't need anti-heal, so you can go Serrated Grudge instead. Death Stance, really good bruiser item. Honestly, Death Stance can probably move up into A tier. Very, very good bruiser item. Really good if you're against any other AD champions. It just allows you to basically take reduced damage, and then if you get a takedown, you're then going to get a bit of healing afterwards. You know, you get armor, attack damage, and ability haste all in the same item. So it's really good for against attack damage champions. Really good because you have that armor and also the extra attack damage. Spirit Shogun, I'm not really too sure about. I feel like this item's okay. There are some champions that I think can work pretty decently with this. You know, Jax, for example, with his ultimate, he's going to be using a lot of his abilities afterwards. Other than that, there's not really a lot of champions. Some people would say build this on Hecarim, but Hecarim works differently in this game, and the Spirit Shogun on PC League works completely different to the Spirit Shogun in Wild Rift. Whereas you need to use your ultimate and then you get ability haste for your basic abilities, which you don't really need for Hecarim because he already has so much ability haste already in his build. He can go phase rush, which also gives him ability haste. And to be honest, his abilities are already on low cooldown. Titanic Hydra is a pretty good tank item. It's decent. The only downside is that it got a nerf recently, not last patch, but a patch before, I feel like, where it lost 50%, 50 of its base health. And I think they also reduced the bonus health ratio, if I'm not mistaken. They increased the time, or decreased the time, I should say, where you can actually use the cleave passive, which I think is really, really good. It means that you can proc Titanic Hydra more often, but it doesn't scale as well anymore. But still, overall, pretty decent item. Blade Ruin King, again, going from its rune item back to this item means that it's not as strong anymore. It's not 3,000 gold anymore. It doesn't give you the enhanced version of the passive. Let me scroll down so you can actually read the passive. Yeah, the drain effect is not as strong as what it was on the rune item. It's more expensive. It gives you less stats. I think this is the problem now, right? Is that so many people saw the power of some of these items, especially the rune item versions. You know, you think of Blade of Ruin King, you think of Infinity Edge. The downside of these items were basically non-existent. You're only losing like 100 HP and gaining like 20% crit chance, gaining so much stats from Blade of Ruin King that now it's come back to the old version of the items. It just makes you realize how bad these items are in the first place. So yeah, hopefully that gets buffed. Terminus is just bloody expensive. Geez, 3,400 gold for this item now. I mean, it's hard because Terminus is such a good item. Like, it's so good. It gives you damage. It gives you tankiness. It gives you attack damage. It gives you attack speed. It gives you on-hit damage as well, which is also magic damage, which is also makes it really, really difficult to itemize against. But it's just so expensive as an item. You know, this item, I mean, to be honest, it warranted a nerf. It happened a few patches ago now. It used to be like 3,200 gold and it was so broken. It was by far the strongest item in the game. There are so many champions going Terminus, even every single AD carry is going Terminus, but not anymore, unfortunately. But still a really good item on hits carries that want to get a lot of attack speed. C-tier items are more situational items and more items that are not going to be used in pretty much every single on every single champion, I should say. Collector in general, I just still don't like. I still think Collector needs a buff. I don't like these stats. I don't like the passive. The passive works well on some champions, you know, champions that want to kind of get that little bit of an edge to try and get the kill. Champions like Jhin, for example, that need to reload and doesn't have that same attack speed as other AD carries. Samira could also work pretty well because you're doing more damage with your abilities, especially your ultimate, and you want to try and get your resets. Neela as well, you want to try and deal as much damage as possible and try and get as much kills as possible. Whereas in general, for general crit marksman, you never want to build this. That's just my opinion. Manamune only situational on like a few champions. Like one champion is Ezreal. Is there any champions outside of that? Probably not. You could build on Varus if you're going for a lethality build. In general, you don't want to build this item. It's decent that it got buffed recently, but still not great. Essence Reaver, again, kind of same as Collector, in my opinion, one of the worst crit items. It works pretty decently on some champions that want to deal more damage with your abilities. The downside of Essence Reaver is that you're kind of stuck in a way. Someone like Misfortune, for example, that can use Essence Reaver, right? If you use your third ability, which you want to, you know, with Misfortune, you always want to start off with your third ability to reduce the movement speed of enemy champions. You're going to be proccing Essence Reaver with your third ability, which you don't want to do. You want to wait and proc Essence Reaver with your first ability. but because it's the first ability that you use, proccing the Essence Reaver passive, you know, allowing you to deal more damage with that ability, it means you're kind of stuck and you're kind of forced to play a certain playstyle that might not suit you. That's, in my opinion, what Essence Reaver is like. Kenpunk Chainsword is decent. Honestly, I think it's like, I mean, maybe it deserves to move in B tier. Honestly, some of these items, you know, talking about them now maybe deserve to move up. I think Kenpunk Chainsword deserves to move up. Nash's Tooth as well, talking a second, maybe deserves to move up, and Death Dance probably deserves to move up. I don't think Kenpunk Chainsword is that bad. I think a lot of people just prefer Mortal Reminder because you get that percent crit chance, which can be pretty lucky on some bruisers. But this is still a pretty good tank item in general, and a pretty good bruiser item that you can build. Support items I'll talk about afterwards. Nash's Tooth could be built on quite a few champions. Echo, Vayne as well is also a good one. Gwen, there are some champions that work with this pretty well. The item in general is just a little bit weird, right? It's like kind of a mix of one hit, but then you want the extra bit of ability power because the ability power is more. So it's like, do you build with some AP champions as well? But there's not really a lot of AP champions that auto attack except for Echo, so it's a bit of a weird spot. And Phantom Dancer, another item that's just pretty weak in terms of crit item. You would much rather get the auto attack range and build the attack speed item Magnetic Blaster over gaining the extra attack speed from Phantom Dancer. Wow, this might be a long video. Need to take a sip of a drink. Onto magic items now. We have the new magic item Psychic Protector, which I'll talk about a bit later on. As you can see, it's quite low on the tier list, but we'll talk about the other items first. Luna's Echo, just by far the best mage item in the game. You have the Disorder Echo passive, which works super well for wave clear, for poke damage. In terms of stats, it gives you every single stat that you need for a mage, the extra mana to help you use your abilities more often, a lot of ability power, ability haste, and also percent magic penetration. So overall, an incredible item that you can go on pretty much every single mage. There are only some mages that might want to skip this item because they don't actually need the mana, because the base mana is already high enough that you can spam abilities. But even then, you still want to build Luna's Echo just because it's a very powerful first item. Deathcap, even though it's not the ruined version of Deathcap, so we don't have that extra ability power on the item, still incredible as an AP champion. You still want to build this on every single AP champion as possible, whether you're playing a more bruiser AP champion like Lilia, whether you're playing an assassin AP champion, whether you're playing a mage. Rabadon's Deathcap is a must. So much ability power, and increasing your overall ability power as well by a certain percentage means that this item scales infinitely into the mid and the late game. Infinity Orb, again, going from the light version down to normal version. Some people are not building this item now, maybe because they just have in their brain that this item now is more expensive and the item is still the light version. People have to remember that this item has gone back down to 2,900 gold, and it gives you that 85 ability power again. Yes, your bonus damage is not going to happen until 35% instead of 45%, but it's such a good AP item. Again, mainly used on every single assassin and every single AP mage. And the same with Harmonic Echo. Again, you know, kind of the same situation. This is now not the light version of Harmonic Echo, which costs like 3,200 gold. The passive is, again, not as strong as what it was before, but people have to remember what the meta was like before we had the light and shadow items. Harmonic Echo was a must rush item on every single support in the game. The value that you get from this item, especially from the passive, when you shield or when you heal, getting that extra bonus healing is so huge. And that's why, you know, in my opinion, it's up in the S tier as well. Again, you build this on pretty much every single enchanter support. In the A tier, we have the Lights of Morellonomicon and Ocean's Trident. Both these items are so important to build. Again, as I mentioned before, with AD items, there's a lot of healing in the game, so Morellonomicon is going to be really important to proc grievous wounds. But Ocean's Trident, I mentioned that shielding in general is very situational, but I feel like the stats of this item and how cheap this item is, even if you're not against any shielding, this could be an item worth buying. It's so powerful, actually, that you just have so many incredible stats. Look at this, 2,600 gold. You get 80 ability power. You compare that to something like Death Cap. I mean, yes, you don't. Okay, compared to something like Ludens, for example, you're spending an extra 400 gold for 5 ability power. Like, this item is so incredibly powerful right now. Like I said, even against non-shielding, but when you're against shielding, this is a must buy. I mean, sometimes I would even build this maybe before Infinity Orb or Death Cap, just because how cheap it is and how much great stats you get. A Crown of Shattered Queen, just by far the best defensive item. This item's been nerfed so many times that people were saying that this was never going to be built anymore. It's still built on pretty much every single AP mage and every single AP assassin. Again, it's this same thing with Edge and Knight, where that shield passive is just so vital. It's so big, and overall it's just really great item. Horizon Focus. Now, this is the one situation where Horizon Focus has actually gone back to how it was in the light version. Sorry, no, it keeps, sorry, let me rephrase that. So Horizon Focus has actually kept its light version. So it's the only item from the ruined and the item list from before that has actually kept its current version. So this Horizon Focus, even though it's the base version, is the same Horizon Focus that we saw in the light version, which was a huge buff for Horizon Focus. You know, every single AP mage, or most long range, I should say, AP mages were building this item just because you get so much extra damage with this crazy item. And to be honest, there was even champions like Nautilus, full AP, building this item as well. So really nice that they kept the light version of this item. Even though it's still the standard item, it's still really good. Riftmaker, pretty decent item. It's good in most scenarios, whether you're a mage or an assassin. You don't have to be in combat for that long. You only need to be in combat for like 3 seconds, and then you get the extra true damage. You've got a nice amount of Omnivamp as well, which again, Omnivamp works with magical damage. So again, it's pretty much an item that is built in pretty much every single AP composition. Leandri's Torment, bit of a situational item. This item works really well against tanks, but other than that, you don't really want to build this item. You'd rather build items from the tiers above in terms of AP items. That's why this item is in B tier, but still overall pretty good scaling item. You know, the more ability power you have, the more this item scales. But again, it does more damage to enemies based on their maximum health. Lichbane, more to do with mages that like to auto attack afterwards, and is mainly used on assassins, champions like Fizz, Evelyn, Gragas. You know, these sort of champions that like to one-shot and do a lot of burst damage. Lichbane also scales with the amount of ability power that you have, so most of the time you want to build this a little bit later on down the line in your build, but overall very strong item. We then have the other support items. You know, all of these support items are very good. It just depends on the current situation of the game. You know, if you have a very auto attack heavy team that have a lot of AD damage, then Ardent Center is a must. If you have a very AP focused team that they like to have ability power and ability haste, then you want to build Staff of Flame Water. If you as a champion have a lot of slows or immobilize effects, then you can go for Imperial Mandate. You know, all of these support items work incredibly well. They're all in the B tier, so they're really good. Again, it's just kind of situational depending on what your composition needs. Awakened Soul Stealer, again, another really strong AP item, very good assassin item as well. You know, the extra magical vamp. Most of the time only really used on assassins because, you know, with the second passive, you know, takedowns on enemy champion reduces the remaining cooldowns of your abilities. So when you jump in as an assassin, when you one-shot them on, for example, someone like Evelyn, you can then use your other abilities again, or it reduces the cooldown of your other abilities. So you need to make sure you one-shot within 3 seconds, because if you don't kill the enemy within 3 seconds, then you're kind of wasting a passive on this item. C tier, let's talk about Psychic Protector. This item is very situational. I do not think this item is very good at all. I was very tempted to put this in D tier, and then they changed it and they hot fixed it where you can actually now build Psychic Protector and Death Cap in the same build, which opens up a lot of nice opportunities with this item. The only problem is that the ability power that you get scales with bonus health. So you only want to really build this on champions that like to build health. You know, one strong combo that I could see happening in the game is going Psychic Protector into Rod of Ages. I haven't seen it too much yet, and I haven't seen it succeed that much yet. So that's why both these items are in C tier. But the extra health that you get from Rod of Ages and also Rod of Ages passive that scales will then work with Psychic Protector. Psychic Protector also works with runes. For example, a Grasp Me Undying, an Overgrowth, which will again give you a little bit of extra ability power. So it's an okay item that can scale, but to be honest, how many kind of tank AP champions do we have? You know, the only really champions that I can see this working really well on is Maokai, Lilia, Mordekaiser eventually when he comes out. The only cool unique champion with this item is Vladimir, where I think the item kind of goes in a cycle. So if you don't know with Vladimir, the ability power that you buy, so say for example you go Infinity Orb first item, right? That ability power that you get gets converted into bonus health. The bonus health from Vladimir's passive, I'm pretty sure this is how it works, gets converted into ability power from Psychic Protector. But then I don't think the ability power from Psychic Protector then converts into bonus health, because then you'll just have an endless cycle and you'll just be getting infinite amounts of AP and health. So there's probably some coding in there with Vladimir's passive. I'm not too sure what it is, but hey, we'll have to maybe test it out a little bit more. Rylai is more of a situational item. You know, you don't really build this on a lot of champions at all. You only really build this on champions that like to crowd control and like to slow enemy champions so you can get into range to use other abilities. Swain and Zyra, for example, Singed with obviously the mist, making it more difficult for enemies to escape. Archangel Staff doesn't really get built too much. It's not really that great of an item. I don't think most champions really need that much mana in the game. You already have the mana boots, which give you mana regen. You have Luden's Echo, which is a very strong item. And most of the time, you're not building Archangel Staff unless you have a champion like Orianna that wants to spam as many abilities as possible. Cosmic Drive, just not a good item. You don't even want to build this on Vladimir or even Lilia. I don't think the movement speed is worth it. I don't think the item in general gives a lot of great base stats, and I don't think it's very good. God of Ages I mentioned already. It has the scaling health, the scaling mana, and the scaling ability power. I do still think it's a little bit too slow though. They did buff it a little bit where you can now get the full stacks at 40 seconds instead of, I think it was 45 seconds. And I think you get a little bit of extra bonus health and ability power mana. I can't remember what the buffs were exactly. But again, not really too powerful. And then you have good old Crystalline Reflector down here, which is just an awful item. It's terrible. You never want to build this item on anyone. They basically killed this item when they kind of remade it in a way. So yeah, not a great item. And then Medjai Soul Stealer. Again, you never want to build this item. It costs way too much gold. You're risking your entire game off of one item. It's just awful. You never want to build this item. On to defense. And then we have boots, and then we have the boots enchants. We're nearly at the end. This is an incredibly long video, but I kind of wanted to go into depth into every single item, so I think it's pretty decent. Right, S tier. Okay, big thing again. Warmogs going from the ruined version back to its normal version. So what has that done? So the ruined version of Warmogs, the only reason it wasn't really built as a first item anymore on supports is because that bonus health that you need to get to the Warmog's Heart passive was, I believe it was 1,150. So you couldn't buy boots, Warmog's armor, and relic shield, or just any item in general. Like Warmog's as a first item wasn't a good item in the ruined version. Now it's gone back to the version it is before. You only need 950 health to be able to get the Warmog's Heart passive. So you can now build relic shield. You can build Warmog's first armor, and then you can go for your boots as well. This will then give you the Warmog's health passive, or Warmog's Heart passive. So that means that you're going to be building this on every single tank support as a first item. It's going to be really, really good to allow you to heal out of combat. And you can also even build this on tanks in the top lane as well. And speaking of tanks in the top lane, Heartsteel still really, really good on them. The scaling is so incredible with this item. It doesn't give you that much big of an early power spike. Again, it's more to do with scaling. Some people even build this on supports like Nautilus and Alistar. Personally, I do not like this on supports at all. I would much rather build Warmog's armor for an extra 50 gold and get a power in terms of healing out of combat. You don't have the same scaling as Heartsteel, but to be honest, are you ever going to be staying in combat for that long as a tank? I mean, maybe some tanks like Nautilus, you might stay in the front line and auto attack a lot. Alistar, you might auto attack a lot. So you might get a few stacks with Heartsteel, but I'd much rather go with Warmog's armor. But both of these items are really good. You know, you can build both of them and they'll be really, really powerful as a combo. Thornmail pretty much built on every single tank. Again, same situation as before, where healing is so vital in this game, and there's so much healing in the game where you need grievous wounds. So Warmog's armor is a must. Thornmail, sorry, is a must. Zeke's Convergence. The The magic resist turning into health with Zeke's convergence was such a big buff for this item. I think it also reduced the gold as well. The big difference between PC League's Zeke's convergence and Wild Rift Zeke's convergence is we still have the old passive. So that is why, in my opinion, it is not broken tier. It's not an S tier item. It's still only an A tier item. It's still a really good item, don't get me wrong, but you have to kind of rely a little bit on your team to hit the same champion that you are near. So then you can get the extra damage from the passives, but still a very, very strong item that's really, really cheap and really, really good. Speaking of really cheap, Force of Nature going down to 2,750 gold is incredibly powerful. The extra movement speed that you can get from the Storm passive and also the Absorb passive as well. Most of the time, if you are a support and if you're against a lot of magic damage, the extra movement speed that you get from Force of Nature when you take magic damage is really, really big. Really, really like this item. It's super cheap and it's a great magic resist item. Sunfire Aegis being buffed. This item does a crazy amount of damage now. And now, when you're in combat for that few seconds, you know, that 4 seconds, boy, this item does a lot of damage. I mean, all you have to do is just stick on an enemy champion, and it does so much burn damage around you. You know, you can build this on champions like Dr. Mundo, Sion, Shen, basically champions that want to stick close to enemy champions, Ornn as well, and you're just going to do so much damage around you, which is great. Sterex Gauge, unfortunately, we don't have the light version, or was it the dark? I can't remember if it was a light or dark item now. Actually, I'm pretty sure it was a dark item. I can't remember now. But anyway, even as a normal item, Sterex Gauge is still really, really good. You don't have that cleanse anymore on the Lifeline passive, but overall still a very, very strong item. For bruisers especially, that like to get health and also get a bit of extra attack damage. Twin Guard is not broken anymore. It's not S tier. The only downside of the normal version of Twin Guard compared to the Shadow version is that you now need to be in combat for 5 seconds instead of, I believe it was 4 seconds before, or 3 seconds before. Actually, I think it was 3 seconds before. The reason why it's so broken as a ruin item is that you didn't need to be in combat for that long, and you can get the empowered version of this item from the passive, you know, gain the size, the tenacity, and also increasing your armor and magic resist. But now the normal version, you need to be in combat for 5 seconds. Guardian Angel, pretty good. I mean, this is really good in the later stages of the game where you're against assassins and you can get one shot. In terms of how much gold it is and the stats, it's not that great, but most people just buy this for the Resurrect passive. Dead Man's Play, also really, really good. I much prefer Force of Nature if you can get away with it, because you get the extra movement speed from when you take magic damage. But if you're not against any magic damage, then Dead Man's Play is the next best option in terms of the armor health item that allows you to get the bit of movement speed that you need on champions like Alistar to get into range to use your combo. Mantle of the 12th Hour, again, another pretty decent item. The Lifeline passive means that when you drop low on health, you gain bonus maximum health. Big thing now that this item gives bonus maximum health and doesn't give healing, because before this item was pretty bad because you would get health, or you would heal a percentage of your health, which would get reduced from items that have anti-heal. Now with Mantle of the 12th Hour, you gain bonus health, so it doesn't actually get reduced by healing, which is pretty big. Searing Crown, bit of a more situational item, but is really good for burn champions that like to have abilities that deal damage over time. Champions like Amumu, for example, and champions that just kind of want to get into the face. You know, this Searing Crown plus Sunfire Aegis combo, just so much burn damage and so much damage just in general, making it really, really good. Iceborne Gauntlet, a bit more situational. There are some champions that could work really well with Iceborne Gauntlet. This is a champion this is an item, sorry, that has a Spellblade passive, but it's a tank Spellblade passive item. So it's really only good for champions that want to use abilities and then auto attack afterwards. Rammus and Malphite come to mind, but overall it's okay. It's pretty decent. Frozen Heart, actually, I kind of like this. When you deal magic damage, you can slow the attack speed of enemy champions, which I think is very, very powerful. This can even be built on some AP mages. You know, if you're playing like support, for example, support Zyra, support Morgana, support Seraphine, because all you need to do is deal with AP damage, right? So it doesn't matter how you deal with the AP damage, your abilities or anything like that. You don't have to be close to the enemies or anything. You just have to build AP damage. So when you deal AP damage, you reduce the enemy's attack speed, which I think is really good in this meta because bruisers are pretty broken. And Dawn Shroud is just gone down to a useless item. The light version, I was really hoping that they would keep the light version of Dawn Shroud like they did with Horizon Focus, because my god, the normal version of this item is just terrible. I much prefer to go the light item from before, because it gave you that extra bit of healing on top of the damage, or sorry, the extra the extra healing on top of the damage. So that was one of the reasons why the light version was so much stronger. Protector's Vow only really built on Brom. That's about it. You don't really have any other situations to build this item, because you have to be close to your allies to be able to get full advantage for this, and Brom is really the only support for that. Abyssal Mask is super situational. I much prefer to build more Force of Nature over Abyssal Mask. If you're against a lot of magic damage, then Abyssal Mask can be good, because you take magic damage and then you deal the extra bonus damage afterwards. But I much prefer Force of Nature. Same with Spirit Visage as well. It's okay if you have healing and shielding to get the bonuses, but again, Force of Nature is just better. Randuin's just super situational. Honestly, even if you're against crit, I don't really like this item. The big reason why this item was strong before is that it reduced the crit damage. So it reduced just every single bit of crit damage. Now it just doesn't. Now you gain termination stacks, and you can deal this, get this extra bit of healing or whatever when you auto attack. No, it's awful. Hate it. Winter's Approach, I don't even build this on Blitzcrank. I think this item is terrible. They tried to buff it. It's still terrible. I don't like it. Ixtali Sieger, I don't know why this item's not been freaking remade or just removed or replaced or anything. Like, the item's just hogsshit. It's awful. Terrible. On to Boots. Boots of Mana and Gluttonous Greaves, still the two best boots in the game. You know, Boots of Mana for the magic penetration, for the extra mana regeneration as well. Such a powerful first item that you want to go. Gluttonous Greaves as well, gives you so much attack damage and the extra Omnivamp. Just behind that is the two defensive boots, which you don't get as much value in the early game anymore, but is still very, very powerful because it gives you also HP on top of that. Mercury Treads, Plated Steel Caps, both very, very powerful. Berserker's Greaves, also really good as well, especially on champions that want attack speed a lot. You can also build this on AD carries. Outburst, you don't really build most of the time, even on assassins that want that plus armor penetration. You most of the time build Gluttonous Greaves instead, because Outburst gives you 5 less AD, and also you get the Omnivamp from Gluttonous Greaves, which I feel like is pretty big. And then you have Boots of Lucidity, which is just awful in general. You know, reducing your, this says summon a spell cooldown. It's like reducing a summon a spell cooldown, yip-de-doo. Getting ability haste, yip-de-doo. I would much rather build any one of these boots instead of Lucidity. It's just terrible. And then we're on to Boots Enchant. Stasis, even though this costs 1,000 gold, it's still one of the best Boots Enchants in the game. When you have the money for this, you always buy this. Just being able to be untargetable for 2.5 seconds saves your life and more. But closely followed behind that, though, there are still other very good Boots Enchants that you can go that are a lot cheaper. Gargle Stoneplate, if you're close to a lot of enemies, if you're a tank or a bruiser, then you can use Gargle Stoneplate and get that huge shielding, which is going to help with survivability. Veil Enchant, most of the time gets builds on every single support now, because as I mentioned, crowd control is such a big thing, so you can actually help your ally and give them a spell shield. Or if you want the spell shield yourself as an AD carry, you can go for Quicksilver, giving you tenacity, slow resistance, and granting you immunity. So if you get hit by crowd control, say for example Ash Ultimate or TF card, you just use Quicksilver and then you can move around again. Or Protobelt if you need that extra mobility. This works really well on some carriers that need the extra mobility. Fiora, for example, Riven, or even just a mobile champions in general, like Varus, that want an extra bit of mobility. Meteor works well as a decent AP alternative, a decent damage source for just any champion in general, you know, doing an extra little bit of cool damage. The cool, unique interaction with Meteor is that you can use this with Camille ulti. When you ulti with Camille, when you use Meteor, it's 100% guaranteed to hit. Locket and Redemption, two other pretty good support enchants. You know, Redemption can also give you vision as well as giving your team healing. Locket, just in general, giving you a shield is always pretty nice. But then you just get countered by things like Serpent's Fang. Glorious Enchant is okay for the extra movement speed. It's not that great in my opinion. I don't think this is very good at all. You don't really build this on any champions. Like, movement speed in general, you don't really need on a lot of champions. Trying to think of maybe who you need this on. Even a champion like Ramos, for example, right? You already have so much movement speed in your kit that you don't need the extra movement speed. You'd rather go something like Gargle instead to help with survivability. Revitalizing Grail, bonus shielding and healing doesn't really come into effect, really, to be honest with you. It's not really that great. What's the point of getting bonus healing and shielding when your ally is just going to get crowd controlled and they're just going to die? So that's why Enchant, in my opinion, is better. Magnetron, I've seen some cool interactions. The big thing now that you can dash to a minion or a monster, and you can dash to an allied champion. So there are some pretty cool interactions that I've been seeing. I've been seeing this built a lot on Alistar. So you can dash onto an ally, or you can dash onto a minion with the Magnetron enchant, and then you can get into range to use your combo, for example. Teleported chant, you never want to buy. You only really want to build this in the late game if you're like 30 minutes in the game and if you're about to die and a major objective spawns, or you want to teleport to that major objective ASAP. Only time you ever want to build this. Repulsor as well, not very good. Like you're knocking a Kha'Zix away, but the Kha'Zix can just jump onto you and kill you anyway. You're knocking a Renekton away, but Renekton has a dash that can easily get onto you. You're knocking a Riven away that has 20 million dashes. You're knocking a Fiora away that has 20 million dashes. What's the point of knocking enemy champions away when they can just kill you? And Ravenous Chant is just... This new Ravenous enchant is probably the worst enchant in the game. The damage is super low. The healing is super low. Even after hotfix buff, it's not that great. And that's going to do it for all the items in patch 5.2. Again, I feel like I might need to make some changes with these items, which I'll do after this video. But if you reached this point of video, fair play. I've nearly lost my voice by recording this video, but hopefully you enjoyed it anyway. Thanks very much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.